A brush cracked against wet stone and skidded across the floor. A woman's knees buckled on the tile. She caught herself on both hands before her belly could hit the ground. Cold water soaked through her dress. She stayed down, breathing hard, and reached for the brush again. A voice above her said the child inside her was weak blood, not worth the floor she knelt on. The woman did not answer. She had learned not to. She scrubbed the same spot she had scrubbed an hour ago, and her arms shook and she kept going. Her name was Lena. She was the mate of a king, and she was cleaning a servant's hallway on her hands and knees while carrying his heir. Down the hall, a dog began to bark. What happens when that king comes home 2 days early and sees this? Stay with me on this one. Ronan Vasquez pushed his horse through the last mile of pine 2 full days ahead of anyone who could have warned the house he was coming. The border truce was signed. 3 northern packs had put their marks on it, and for the first time in a generation, nobody along the ridge was sharpening anything. He should have stayed north another week to enjoy it. He didn't. He wanted his own fire and his own mate, and he wanted them tonight. Running beside the horse was a wolfhound the color of ash, silver-eyed, big as a small pony. Cinder. Ronan had raised the dog from a pup that fit in one hand. In 15 years, that animal had never once been wrong about a threat. When Cinder growled, Ronan drew his blade first and asked questions later. That was the arrangement, and it had kept him alive more than once. The estate came into view past the tree line. Ashfall Hollow. Stone walls, a great hall hung with banners, kennels, stables, the whole seat of a pack that Ronan had bled to hold together. Coming home, he always felt the same thing, a loosening in the chest, relief. This time the relief didn't come. His gut pulled tight instead, and he couldn't say why. Then Cinder took off. The dog didn't run for the front gate the way he always did. He cut hard to the left, along the outer wall, toward the servant's wing. And he was barking, not the happy racket he made when he smelled home. This was the other sound, the warning. Ronan had heard it maybe a dozen times in his whole life, and every single time something had been badly wrong. He swung down off the horse before it fully stopped. Grooms came running, saw his face, and thought better of speaking. He left the reins in the dirt and followed the dog. Now you have to understand who Ronan was and who he was walking toward. His father had died when Ronan was 19, killed in the last of the old pack wars, and the crown had landed on a boy who wasn't ready for it. The one who'd held everything together in those first raw years was his mother, Oteline, the dowager. A woman with a straight back and a colder head than any general Ronan ever commanded. She'd taught him to rule. She'd sat beside the throne when he was too young to hold it alone, and half the old council still looked to her out of habit before they looked to him. The pack respected her. A good number of them feared her. Ronan had never once questioned her loyalty, because questioning Oteline was a thing that simply did not occur to people who valued their peace. And then there was Lena. Ronan had married her against advice. She came from a smaller pack out east, a peace match that turned into something real faster than either of them planned. She was gentle in a place where gentle was rare, and she carried it like it cost her nothing. His mother had smiled at the wedding, a thin smile. Ronan had told himself it was enough. Oteline had never warmed to the girl, sure, but she'd never raised a hand or a voice either, not that he'd seen. And Lena never complained. In every letter he'd had from home these past weeks, Lena wrote that all was well. The house was calm. She was resting. He should not worry. She had written those words on her knees. He just didn't know it yet. Cinder reached the wing first and stopped at a low door, ears flat, a growl rolling out of him that Ronan felt in his own teeth. Ronan put his hand on the latch. Through the wood he could hear a voice, level, patient. The voice of someone explaining a simple thing to someone slow. He knew that voice better than his own heartbeat. It was his mother. He didn't knock. He never got the chance to decide whether he would. Cinder shoved the door with his whole body, and it swung wide, and Ronan stepped into a scene that would divide his life into a before and an after. Lena was on the floor, on her hands and knees in a wet gray dress, a scrubbing brush in one white-knuckled fist, her belly heavy and low. Her hair had come loose and hung in her face. When she looked up and saw him, she didn't cry out in relief. That was the thing that broke something in Ronan. She flinched. She flinched like a caught animal, and her first move was to hide the brush behind her as if she could make the whole picture disappear if she were quick enough. Across the room, in a velvet chair that did not belong in a servant's hallway, sat Adeline, a cup of tea on the arm, not a hair out of place. She looked at her son the way you'd look at weather, mild surprise, no alarm. "Ronan," she said, "you're early." He didn't answer her. He crossed the room and he went down on one knee in the dirty water and he took Lena's face in both hands. She was shaking. Up close he could see how thin she'd gotten. The wrists, the hollows under her eyes. This was a woman who had been slowly worn down to a thread, and he had been away signing treaties while it happened. "How long?" he said. His voice didn't sound like his own. Lena's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "How long?" he said again. "It isn't what it looks like," Adeline said in that same even tone. The girl asked to be useful, idle hands in her condition. It's good for a body to keep moving. I was supervising, that's all. Cinder turned toward the velvet chair and showed every tooth in his head. "Call off the animal," Adeline said. Ronan did not call off the animal, he lifted Lena. She weighed nothing. He got one arm under her knees and one behind her back and stood, and she pressed her face into his neck, and finally, she started to cry, and the sound of it was worse than any scream because it was so quiet. She'd trained herself to cry quietly, in his own house. "You watched," Ronan said to his mother. He wasn't shouting. Later people would say that was the frightening part. He never raised his voice. "You sat in a chair and you drank tea and you watched my mate scrub a floor with my child inside her." "I raised you to lead this pack," Adeline said, rising smoothly, setting the cup down. "Which means I know things you are too soft to hear. That girl's blood is thin. Her line has no strength in it. What she carries will be a weak king, and a weak king is how packs die. I did not spend 20 years holding Ashfall together to hand it to something feeble. Someone in this family has to think about the pack." "Get out of my sight," Ronan said, "before the dog decides for both of us." And here is where you'd expect the storm, the shouting, the threats. It didn't come. Adeline gathered her skirts, inclined her head the exact right amount, and walked out past the growling dog without hurrying a single step. At the door she paused. "We'll speak when you've calmed down," she said. "You always do calm down, Ronan, that's your trouble." Then she was gone. Ronan carried Lena up to their own rooms himself. He wouldn't let a servant touch her. He set her in the big bed and he sent for the pack healer, and he sat on the edge of the mattress holding her hand while the old woman looked her over. "Exhaustion," the healer said. "Poor food, too much standing. Nothing broken, the babe strong for now, but this could not go on. Rest. Warmth, food, peace, peace." Ronan almost laughed. Lena finally told him in pieces between long silences. It had started slow right after he'd left for the north. A word here, a chore there. Then the servants stopped meeting her eyes because they took their orders from the dowager and everyone knew it. Then the meals got smaller. Then the work got heavier. And every time Lena thought of writing to him, Adeline would remind her gently that the truce was fragile, that the pack was one wrong word from breaking, that a king in the middle of delicate work did not need his wife crying to him about household squabbles. "If you love him," Adeline had told her, "you will not be the crack that splits this house." So Lena had swallowed it for months to protect the very thing that was hurting her. Ronan sat with that a long time. Then he tucked the blanket to her chin and he waited until her breathing went slow and even and she was truly asleep. He built the fire up. He poured himself a drink he didn't touch. The house had gone quiet around him. His mother was in her wing. His mate was safe in his bed. The dog lay across the doorway, finally calm. Ronan let out a long breath. It was ugly and it would take time, but the worst was behind them now. He'd found it. He'd stopped it. He set his glass down and told himself the same thing his mother had thrown at him, that he'd calm down, that it was over. He almost believed it. He was wrong. It hadn't even started. Cinder's head came up off his paws. The dog rose without a sound and crossed to the far wall, the one the room shared with the corridor to the old council chamber, and he stood there rigid, staring at the stone, and out of him came that low warning growl again. Not at the door his mother had left through. At the wall. At something on the other side of it. Ronan heard it a second later. Voices. Low, careful voices, deep in a house that should have been asleep. And one of them was Adeline's, and she did not sound like a woman who had just been sent from her son's presence in disgrace. She sounded like a woman giving orders. Ronan followed the dog into the dark of the corridor, and he stopped at the council chamber door, and he did not go in. He stood in the shadow and he listened, and what he heard rearranged everything he thought he understood about his own kingdom. There were 4 men in that room with his mother. He knew all of them. Council elders, the keeper of the treasury, the captain of the estate guard, and they were not discussing a squabble between a mother and a wife. They were discussing him. "He's soft on the girl, worse than we thought," the treasurer was saying. "If that child is born and lives, the succession is fixed. We lose our window." "Then the window closes before the child is born," Adeline said, calm, the same voice she'd used pouring tea. "I have carried this house on my back for 20 years while my son plays peacemaker with wolves who'd cut his throat the moment his back turned. The line goes to Corin. My brother's boy has iron in him. When Ronan sees his heir is a sickly thing, or when there is no heir at all, he will come around to sense the way he always does. And if he does not come around..." A pause. "Then Ashfall has had weak kings before, and Ashfall has replaced them before." Ronan's hand found the wall to steady himself. Do you understand what he was hearing? This was not a cruel old woman bullying a daughter-in-law. This was a coup. It had been running under his feet for years, wearing the face of a mother's loyalty. The council he trusted answered to her. The guard that protected his walls answered to her. She had let him ride off to make peace on the borders because it kept him out of the house while she ran the real war inside it. And the weak blood she kept spitting at Lena was not an insult. It was a plan. A justification she was laying down, brick by brick, so that when Lena's child conveniently failed to thrive, everyone would already believe it was always going to. He'd walked in on her supervising a floor. He'd thought he'd caught the whole crime. He'd caught the smallest visible corner of it. If you're still with me this far, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because what Ronan does next is the part they'll be talking about for 100 years in Ashfall Hollow. Ronan backed away from that door without a sound, and for once in his life he did exactly what his mother expected. He calmed down, not because the rage left him, because he finally understood that rage was the one thing she could use. An angry king shouting accusations with no proof against a beloved matriarch in a house full of her people. She'd survive that easily. She'd twist it. She'd have him looking mad and cruel, a man who'd turn on the mother who saved him, all over a servant girl's tears. No, to beat Adeline he could not be Adeline's son. He had to be something she'd never bothered to teach him because she never thought he had it in him. He had to be patient. So Ronan went back to his rooms and he sat by Lena's bed and he thought all night. By morning he had the shape of it. He needed 2 things. He needed proof the council could not wave away. And he needed to know how far it went, because a plan to let a child fail to thrive is a soft way of saying something much worse, and Ronan needed to know whether they meant to wait for it or make it happen. He got his answer faster than he wanted. The healer came to change Lena's tonic that afternoon, the strengthening draft she'd left the night before. Ronan stopped her at the door and asked, quiet, to see it first. Old habit from campaign where you learn to look at what goes in the cup. The healer, a decent old soul with no love for the dowager, let him take a look and a smell, and her face changed, because that wasn't her tonic. Somebody had swapped it. The bottle in her bag was right, sealed the way she'd left it. The one sitting on Lena's bedside table was not. Same color, different smell underneath. Bitterroot. In the amount there, it wouldn't kill a grown woman. But a woman already worn to a thread, carrying a child. It would end the pregnancy and look like nothing but bad luck and thin blood. Weak blood. There it was. They weren't going to wait for the prophecy to come true. They were going to make it true and then point at the body and say, see, we told you. Lena had not drunk from it. She'd been too tired the night before and Ronan had let her sleep. That accident of exhaustion had saved 2 lives. Now Ronan had his proof. A bottle, a swap, a witness who'd sworn what she left and what she found. But a bottle is a thing anyone can claim was planted. He needed her to say it. He needed Adeline to admit, in front of the men who followed her, what she was, because half of them followed her out of fear and habit, not love, and fear breaks the moment the thing you fear looks weak. So Ronan set a table. He announced publicly that in 3 days he would hold a grand feast in the Great Hall to celebrate the truce, and he added with a warm smile, to honor his mother for her years of service to the pack, service he intended to reward. He said it where servants could carry it. He watched the message reach her, and he watched Adeline believe it because it fit the story she told about her son, that he always calmed down, that he'd been shamed and now he was smoothing it over, buying peace the way he always did, honoring her to make the ugliness go away. She thought she'd won. She thought the floor scene had cost her nothing but an afternoon. In the meantime, Ronan worked. Quietly, one by one, he went to see certain men, not the council, the others. The blacksmith whose son Ronan had pulled from a river, the old border captains who'd fought beside his father and never trusted the soft hands of the treasury, the kennel master, the stable hands, the people with no seat at any table who saw everything and were counted by no one. He didn't ask them to fight. He asked them one question. When the moment came, whose name would they shout? And every one of them, when he looked them in the eye, said his. That's the thing Adeline never counted, you see. She counted the council. She counted the guard. She counted power the way it looked on paper. She never counted the people who loved him because in her whole life she had never once needed anyone to love her. It had always been enough to be feared. That was the crack in her, not her cruelty. Her certainty. The night before the feast, Ronan sat with Lena and told her everything, all of it, the council, Corin, the bottle. He watched her face go pale and then slowly go hard, and she took his hand and put it flat on her belly where the child was turning, and she said, "Don't you dare do this quietly to spare me. Do it loud. I have been quiet for 4 months. I am done being quiet." And Ronan, who had loved this woman for 2 years, fell in love with her all over again in that one moment. Loud, he agreed, "You have my word." The great hall was full, every bench packed, every torch lit, the long tables groaning with food, the whole household, high and low, the council in their good clothes near the dais. Corin, Adeline's iron-blooded nephew, seated close to the front where a favored heir would sit, smiling like a man who'd already been promised something. And Adeline at Ronan's right hand, in deep green, a queen in everything but name, accepting the warm looks of a room that had been told this was her night. Ronan stood. The hall went quiet. Cinder lay at the foot of the dais, silver eyes moving over the crowd, still as stone. "I called you here to honor my mother," Ronan said, and his voice carried to the back wall. "For 20 years of service to Ashfall Hollow, so let's speak plainly about that service. Let's speak about exactly what my mother has been doing for this pack." Adeline smiled and inclined her head to the room. "While I was north making peace," Ronan went on, "my mother was here keeping order. Keeping my counsel close, keeping my guard loyal, keeping my wife on her knees scrubbing floors, hungry month after month so the child she carries would come out weak. And when that wasn't fast enough," he reached into his coat and set the bottle on the table with a crack that echoed. "This was left at my mate's bedside 3 nights ago. Bitterroot. Enough to kill the child and call it thin blood. Our healer will swear what she left and what she found. It was not the same bottle." The smile went off Adeline's face. Not all at once, just enough. "My son is unwell," she said, turning to the room, warm and sad. "You can all see it. He's been under great strain at the border. He comes home, he finds his wife tired, and grief has turned his mind. To accuse his own mother on no proof but a bottle anyone could carry in a coat." She spread her hands. "This is what a weak king looks like. This is exactly what I have feared." And it almost worked. You could feel the room tilt. Doubt is a fast-moving thing. Half those faces started sliding toward her because she was steady and he was raw, and steady always looks like truth. Then Ronan said, "Corin, stand up." The young man stood, uncertain. "3 nights ago," Ronan said, "in the old council chamber past midnight, my mother told 4 men in this hall that the line of ashfall would pass to you, that her son was too soft, that the window would close before my child was born, that ashfall has replaced weak kings before." He let that sit. "I stood outside that door. I heard every word. The treasurer said it. The guard captain said it. They are sitting at this table right now, and they have gone very pale, and any one of them can save himself tonight by being the first to tell the truth. Only the first. Choose fast." Dead silence, then a scrape of a bench. The treasurer, an old man who loved his own skin more than any crown, stood up shaking. "It's true," he said, and his voice cracked. "God help me, it's all true. She's run the council for years. We were afraid. She said Corin, she said the child would never." He couldn't finish. He just sat back down and put his face in his hands. That was the brick pulled from the bottom of the wall. The guard captain went next, babbling, then the third man, each trying to be more sorry than the last, each trying to say she made me before someone said it about them. And the room, which a moment before had been sliding toward Adeline, turned all at once, the way a pack turns, and it turned on her. She stood alone. "You raised me," Ronan said to her, and now, for the first time, there was something under the steel in his voice that might have been grief. "You held this house when I couldn't. I have loved you my whole life, and you tried to poison my child in her mother's own bed and call it fate." He shook his head slowly. "You taught me everything about power, Mother. You just never taught me this part because you never had it. A king is only as strong as what the people are willing to defend. So let's find out who they defend." He didn't order the guard to seize her. The estate guard was half hers. Instead, he simply looked out at the hall, at the blacksmith and the border captains and the stable hands and the kennel master, all the uncounted people, and he said one word. "Well." And the hall roared his name, not politely, not out of duty. They came up off the benches shouting Ronan, Ronan, King Ronan, a wall of sound that shook dust from the rafters, and in that roar every man who'd followed Adeline out of fear understood, all at once, that the thing they'd feared was already finished. Corin sat back down very carefully and put both hands flat on the table where everyone could see them. Adeline looked at the room full of people shouting her son's name, and something in her face that had been iron for 50 years finally cracked all the way through. She had counted everything. She had counted wrong. Cinder rose from the foot of the dais and crossed the floor and stood in front of her, and he did not growl this time. He simply blocked her path, silver eyes steady, and waited. The dog had been right about the threat from the first minute. He always was. It was over. And this time it truly was. They did not kill her. Ronan wouldn't have it, and Lena, when he asked her, wouldn't have it either, which told him everything about the difference between the two women who'd shaped his house. Adeline was stripped of her seat, her counsel, her keys, and every scrap of the power she'd spent a lifetime gathering. She was sent east to a small holding at the very edge of the Pax land with servants who answered to Ronan and walls she would not leave. Not a dungeon. A quiet, permanent smallness, which for a woman like her was the harder sentence. Corin, who'd smiled at a throne he was promised, was sent with her, more relieved than punished, glad to escape with his life. The 3 elders who'd broken and confessed were spared the rope but not their seats. Ronan built a new council, and he built it out of the uncounted. The blacksmith sat on it. So did an old border captain with one hand. So did the healer. Lena got better slowly. Warmth and food and rest, and the simple thing of never once being made to feel afraid in her own home. The color came back into her face. The child came in the spring, strong and loud, a boy with a good pair of lungs that put the lie to every word Adeline had ever said about weak blood. They named him for Ronan's father. Cinder took up a post beside the crib and appointed himself its guardian, and heaven helped the servant who reached in without letting the dog sniff their hand first. Ronan sent his mother one letter months on. He didn't forgive her in it. He wasn't ready and maybe never would be. But he told her the child had lived and was strong, and that he had named him well, and that she would never see him, not out of cruelty. Out of the plain understanding that some doors, once a person walks through them, do not open again from either side. She never wrote back. Ronan didn't expect her to. In a strange way, silence was the most honest thing left between them. Now here's the thing I keep coming back to. On the night it all turned, somebody asked Ronan how he'd known. How he'd known to listen at that wall. How he'd known the whole loyal, orderly house he'd trusted his life to was rotten in the beams. And Ronan didn't credit his own cleverness. He looked down at the big gray dog asleep across the nursery door, and he said the truth. He hadn't known. The dog knew. The dog had run past the great hall and the throne and every proper thing a homecoming king expects, straight to a servant's hallway, because that was where the person he loved was hurting, and love was the only compass that animal had ever needed. That's the whole story, really. A house full of clever, powerful people counting seats and votes and fear, sure they understood how strength worked. And one dog who ran toward the crying and one man who followed him. In the end, that beat all the counting in the world. Ronan never did forget the sight of Lena on that wet floor, flinching when he walked in. He carried it, but he let it change into something useful. Every year after, on the coldest night of winter, he walked the servants' wing himself, spoke to every soul in it by name, and made sure not one of them went to bed hungry or afraid. The great and powerful of Ashfall thought it was a strange habit for a king. The uncounted knew exactly what it meant. Their king remembered where the truth had been hiding, and he never stopped listening for the growl,